It's now my pleasure to hand over to Mrs. Nkechi Onukwe, who is the Assistant Director at the Federal Ministry of Women Affairs, and she will speak on the challenges, opportunities, and limits to the ministry, and what roles there are for citizens to hold the ministry to account. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Welcome to this session, and thank God we're able to hear ourselves loud and clear. And I will first of all introduce, welcome to this session, and thank God we're able to hear ourselves loud and clear. And I will first of all introduce the ministry, namely women, children, the aged, and the people living with disability. The ministry started out as a unit in the early 70s. From the unit in the early 80s, it became a department in a ministry, and the Ministry of Social Welfare then. And in 1989, due to the call by international organizations, the ministry was made a commission. In 1989, it became National Commission for Women. In 1995, the ministry became a full-fledged ministry in the Federal Republic of Nigeria, which means it's one of the line ministries. It has every privilege, every authority, every mandate, which a Nigerian ministry, government ministry, will have. And the mission of the ministry is to, ensure there's access to opportunities, be it social, be it economic, be it in any area of life for the 4 constituencies which the ministry operated. Among the 4 constituencies, the Ministry of Women Affairs, the women issues of the Ministry of Women Affairs has been permanent. But this other one has been moving, they will move the child, they will move, but the Ministry for Women, which shows the women component of the ministry, has been steady in the ministry. The ministry also has a mission, and the mission is to, is a gender machinery for the country, and its role is to ensure that issues of women are mainstream in the national development. The ministry has a mandate. The mandate is to advise government on issues of women. The ministry is to liaise with other agencies to ensure that women issues are mainstream in the country. We also coordinate. Well, it's a main apex machinery that coordinates issues of women in the country. The ministry, has a focus or derives its activities from the both national, regional, and international instruments, such as National Gender Policy, Benji Platform of Action, international treaties like CEDAW document, like regional AU, documents, treaties, conventions. So the ministry uses this as its, the tools or the instrument for operation. The ministry, as it were, engages its work particularly based on 12 critical areas of concern of Beijing Platform of Action. The ministry on its own, I will talk about the achievement of the ministry now. The ministry, through the effort of the government, the ministry has a political will. First and foremost, the government of Nigeria has a political will on issues of women, and to show this, the current dispensation has given almost 33% to women through appointive position. In the legislative, a woman is a minority leader. And the Attorney General of the Federation is also a woman. That shows the political will the government has shown in issues of women. And to ensure that women, participate in the at highest level of decision making, there's a trust fund for women politicians. So it's not only to give the women money from the trust funds, the capacities of women politicians who want to vie for positions are also groomed on how to, go about it, and they're also funded. Apart from that, the women who already, get, who already appointed, not appointed, who are already elected, also their capacities are also built to ensure that in the work they do as politicians, they carry it out well. The ministry, through the honorable minister, carries advocacy visits to the whole country and all agencies to ensure that issues of women are mainstream. Lest I forget, apart from the federal structure in at the federal level, we also have the state structures that we call it State Ministry of Women Affairs, and there are 36 of it in the country, plus the one the FCT has. We also have a local women development unit at the 774 local governments of the country, which shows the issues of women are just not handled at the federal level, is also handled down to the grassroots level. And there are people working, their capacities are being built to ensure that the issues of women are being mainstreamed. Well, bills has been sponsored. There are sponsored bills on women issue. For example, Violence Against Women Bill and Vulnerable People Bill, which is still being sponsored, which is still being deliberated upon at the National Assembly. The issues of domestication of international issues like CEDAW is also being pursued by the ministry vigorously in partnership with the civil society organizations. I've also mentioned that we have state and local government offices. We also undertake economic empowerment of the women, because it is believed that when women, part of the issues they have is poverty has a woman face, and if the women are economically viable, they will achieve a great deal for themselves. In this area, we have, one for the middle class, that's the poor of the poor women, that's Woodful Women, Fund for Development. We also have Woodful. So that Woodful is meant for the women who are already entrepreneurs, who want to, do more in the business area, and we are doing this in partnership with the Bank of Industry in Nigeria. We also have established focal points. We call it gender focal points in all the sectors, and capacities of these focal points are being built on a regular basis to ensure that their knowledge are updated, to ensure that their skills are also enhanced. The ministry is also working to ensure that the country's budget is agendaed. Well, we have a mentoring project. This mentoring project is an intergenerational project to link the young and the old. I think by so doing, the issues of patriarchy might be dealt with in that way. The ministry has not failed to handle issues as per the emerging issues of HIV and AIDS, emerging issues of climate change, emerging issues of insecurity. The ministry has tried all it could do and still doing to ensure that these emerging issues are included in mainstreaming items of the ministry. I now go back to the issues of patriarchy. Patriarchy, well, is a main issue and is the bane of the Nigerian women, so as it is for other African countries. The few things I want us to know about patriarchy is that patriarchy is a cultural orientation that has spanned, for centuries, and unbundling it and trying to, break through it will take some time. It's a process we need to work with to ensure that it's done, but it's not an easy one. It has not been an easy one, I think it makes it to look as if all the effort, all the progress, all the impact, all the activities of the ministry is not achieved, as if results are not achieved, is hinged on the issues of patriarchy. Patriarchy makes it difficult for full involvement of men in issues of gender. Orientation and socialization of our younger generations are still taking its bearing from patriarchy. You still see, parents, uncles, aunties, reminding the younger ones that it's not done that way, it has to be done this way. And this way we're talking about issues of patriarchy, which does not have, women or gender issues at heart. We should also know that patriarchy is, fully enshrined on culture, customs, and beliefs of each group. Issues of early marriage is also born out, from patriarchy. Maternal mortality issues are also there because of patriarchy, because a woman might not be able to go to the hospital because she needs to take permission from a man in the house before, or the elderly man in the house, or the husband, before she could be taken to the hospital. Illiteracy is still there because patriarchy said the women need to go and marry, they don't need to do so much to go to school. Widowhood practices are still being experienced due to patriarchy. But all this, as I've said earlier, the ministry is trying all it could to ensure that these issues are being handled, and are being handled in a very result-oriented manner. The ministry, as I said earlier, is not working alone. The ministry has a good partnership and a good linkage with the civil society organizations, with the development partners, even with the traditional rulers, to ensure that these are, the issues of patriarchy are dismantled. Well, as I said earlier, it's not easy to be done. It's not easy to, to dismantle it. It has, been perpetrated for centuries, so it's also going to take time. But we're also trying to make sure that, effective strategies are being adopted or adapted to ensure that issues of patriarchy are handled. But you will say, okay, have we really done? Yes, we've done so much. The country has done so much. And do we have prospect? We have so much prospect because, as I mentioned earlier, there's political will. The government, each government of the time, particularly this government, has the political will to handle the issues affecting women, especially as they deal with culture. And also, I tell you that it's also time, given to time. I know part of the prospect is that the men will be willing, because if you can get a convert, one convert, the experience or expression of one convert will tell you that there is hope, that if we can get more converts, more men who will be involved in issues of women, that there will be things will turn around for good. Well, we also feel we have prospect because there's this consciousness. Everybody, both the ministry, both the CSOs, everybody is conscious that we need to deal with these issues. And this is a driving force for us. And because of this, there's always a continuous training, there's always a continuous capacity building to ensure that knowledge is updated, to ensure that skills are developed, to ensure that skills are enhanced, so that we can deal with it. Well, we also need to continue to strengthen our partnership. We already have the partnership. There's no doubt about whether we have partnership. There's partnership. Everybody in Nigeria working in this area, we are working together. We are working together. We have the same spirit to ensure that these issues are dealt with. And I also talk about learning and sharing of best practices. This is the only way we can also, move forward. And to share this, the ministry is always conscious to attend fora, national fora, regional fora, and international fora. And in this bid, the reports are being submitted, and we learn from others. From what we're learning from others is enough to show that we are moving forward and to, deal with issues of, apart from the patriarchy, there might be other issues that will be hindering the work. The main one is this patriarchy, and every other issues we believe it will be dealt with. So the ministry on its own will have few challenges, and these few challenges are, like I mentioned, on issues, emerging issues. So this continue to deplete the effort of the ministry, like when the HIV/AIDS issue came up, climate change joined, and the insecurity came on board. So the capacity that the ministry has already built, it depletes this capacity. So which means we continue with training people and continue to make sure that people are in these areas trying to make things to work. And well, linkage, I've already said, it's we are working on it and we have a good linkage. On these notes, I think I will end here, but I'm only not to know that we are optimistic. Though there are challenges, hindering or hampering the work of the ministry, we have really, have a great milestone. We can also count this milestone, but the issues that are daunting it is the issues of patriarchy, which are trying our best. We are trying and striving, making the necessary linkages, working together with the government, with the churches, with the local authorities, the religious leaders, traditional leaders, every group, and using structures at the grassroots to ensure that the work goes on. So on this note, I thank you for inviting me for this panel. Cheers.
Thank you very much indeed for that optimistic view of the possibilities of change. I think that Nigeria, as one of the largest countries in Africa, has a great deal to offer in terms of learnings. I think that it's a hugely diverse society. So thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Mukwe, for your insights. And I would now like to ask Jennifer Williams, who is the Executive Director of the Women's Legal Centre in Cape Town, to speak about how we actually hold statutory bodies and gender machinery to account. And she will talk about, in particular, the monitoring process of the Commission for Gender Equality in South Africa. And we look forward to hearing how she deals with that and how her organization does, and what sort of possibilities she holds out for change in South Africa and perhaps in the rest of the continent. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be here virtually. I'm going to speak today about the gender monitoring mechanism that is funded by Heinrich Boll and which started in 2011. I'd first just like to set the background briefly. In March 2012, we had a meeting of civil society, and one of the themes I've noticed running through all the speeches today or presentations today is the important role of civil society in holding the state accountable and the gender machinery accountable. At that stage, we came from a previous 5 or 6 years where we'd been experiencing what we would call a backlash, in the sense that we'd felt that there's been some backtracking on women's rights in South Africa, and that feminism had become a dirty word. We'd also seen a rise in conservatism and traditional values, and a conflation between religion and traditional values to justify things which were discriminatory against women. We looked to our high levels of inequality, our high levels of gender-based violence, and there was a feeling that whilst we have a wonderful constitution in place, we're looking at, we have all the records, the highest femicide, the highest domestic violence, the highest rate of gender-based violence. And we felt that this was partly because of the dismal failing of the gender machinery to hold the state accountable to the promises made in the Constitution. The Commission for Gender Equality was one such institution, which was established in terms of Chapter 9 of our Constitution, and it had been quite a letdown. They had a weak public profile. They had a very passive approach, not taking up issues, particularly in relation to LGBTI issues, which we felt had been neglected. There was an uneven and sporadic engagement with civil society, and it seemed that the CGE had, as I think Sheila mentioned, become vulnerable to influence by the dominant political party. The dominant political party had in fact looked into the inefficiencies in the CGE and had basically, the USMAL report had recommended that the CGE be collapsed into the Human Rights Commission. Parliament had been neglecting the CGE because we'd gone through a period where there were no commissioners at all, and for a while there was no chairperson. So the CGE was basically not capacitated and not functioning. They had had some negative reports from the Auditor General in relation to their financial management and some scandals around that. And at the same time, the structure was changing, and a newly constituted Ministry for Women, Children, initially Youth and Persons with Disabilities was established, which didn't seem to have a clear understanding, or there wasn't a clear delineation between the roles of the CGE and the roles of the ministry. So coming together in 2012 to look at the position of the gender machinery and the functioning of the CGE, we decided to get together and form what we call a working group, which would monitor whether or not the CGE was meeting its constitutional mandate, which is quite simply to advance gender equality in South Africa. It has wide powers in terms of the Constitution and the Commission for Gender Equality Act to review, investigate, research, report, and monitor. And we wanted to look at whether or not it was using those powers to bring about gender equality in South Africa, or at least had strategies to bring about gender equality in South Africa. So we set ourselves some activities. Our initial meeting was, I think, of two minds, whether we should support them or whether we should scrap them. And after much discussion, we came to the conclusion that we felt that an independent, constitutionally mandated body was a more effective monitoring structure than a government department. So we felt that we wanted the CGE to be strong and to conduct its business in an independent fashion. And we came up with the dual working model of support and engage. And we went out to engage the CGE and tell them we'll be monitoring and supporting them. And they had a very negative reaction to this. The new commissioners were appointed, and we proposed to monitor the first 100 days of their performance and see what they'd achieved in that time period. We met with the CGE, and they were very defensive. They immediately said, you have no right to monitor us, which of course is not constitutional. And one of their strategic objectives and mandate is in fact to engage with civil society. However, we continued with our work, offering them support, and found ourselves in a situation where we were working closely with the CGE as individual organizations and sometimes as the monitor on certain issues or projects, but overall we hadn't sort of managed to engage with them as a coalition. When we released the 100 Days report, we were quite critical, I think, of what the CGE had done with that one moment in time where they were newly constituted, a whole new batch of commissioners, and could have possibly been more proactive. There wasn't anything new, really, in our research. It's things that have been said about the CGE many times. But the CGE themselves took offense to the report. And they wrote letters to us and to our funders saying that they objected to our methodology, and in fact that they didn't criticize the content or the substance of the report. I think, that was pretty much, common cause, but they felt that we were undermining the role that they were playing. We discussed this report amongst ourselves as civil society, and we looked at the political circumstances. And we had to recognize that the CGE themselves were quite defensive. They were in a political climate where they were possibly under threat of being done away with and replaced by a women's ministry. Their budget, I think, would be going through the women's ministry, and they may be held accountable in some sense to the institution or to the State Department that they were meant to monitor. We also noted the political pressure on the CGE and some of the political relationships between the CGE and the governing party. And so we sat back and we decided, well, look, let's not, we can't reconstitute the CGE, we can't help or make them see their mandate more clearly unless we know what we want to do, what our goals are, how we define ourselves. And so we sat back and we looked at, well, what is our perception of gender equality, that term which we want the CGE to advance in South Africa? And we came to the conclusion that our perception of gender equality is deeply rooted in feminism, and that what we're looking to do is to change the power relations in society, which enable men to dominate women and lead to such high levels of inequality. We then also looked at our methodology, and we had, as I say, been a research and monitoring group beforehand, and we felt that because of the weak institutional gender machinery in the country and the obvious negative reaction of that, at least the CGE, to the monitor, that what was needed was for us to reconstitute ourselves as an advocacy interest group. In other words, that vision of gender equality that we would like to see is then what would guide our engagement with the CGE, with the ministry, and with the gender machinery generally, in order to hold them accountable to advancing that vision of gender equality. At the same time, we looked at developing a model for a dynamic involvement. In other words, meeting with the CGE and recognizing that there will be this tension between monitor and support, and maybe changing the terminology in the sense of saying, well, there will be times when we will support because our objectives are similar. In other words, where you seek to achieve the gender equality that we're advocating for, we will work together. But there will be times when we will be critical, and we will call you to account for not implementing your constitutional mandate. So really a shift in the lens that you look through it and some of the technology. And some behind-the-scenes negotiations with informally between some of the monitor members and some of the commissioners led us to a second meeting with the CGE. By this stage, we had renamed ourselves to SAGE, which is a wise old group of civil society members who've been hoping for an effective gender machinery for many years. But it stands for Supporting Action for Gender Equality. And we actually decided to go into the meeting with an unapologetic attitude. This is our understanding of gender equality. Where you share that vision, we'd like to work with you. Where you don't, we're going to have difficulties. But there are areas in which we can assist you. One of those is your constitutional mandate to work with civil society. We went into the meeting and we expressed our change in focus and our change in name. And we also then drew to the CGEs the attention, the way we want to work with them. So individual organizations will continue to support them on issues. For example, we've worked well together in relation to decriminalization of sex work. We're working well together in relation to the transformation of the judiciary, forced sterilizations. So our member organizations are working with the CGE in particular. And then the mother body or the coalition would work towards 4 key areas. 1, making sure that the CGE is independent and strong. That means that it's free from political influence and that it is capacitated independently. In other words, their budget comes through directly from Parliament, and that they are able to freely and without fear advocate for gender equality. 2, their conceptualization of gender equality. In other words, are they a feminist organization? Do they see themselves deconstructing men and women's roles in society and building a society based on feminist principles and equality? 3, their relationship with civil society. And 4, their internal operations and capacity. which is really about the mismanagement and some of the budgeting and having a costed operational plan. And the response was positive. The CGE, I think, had also realized that they had overstepped the mark by being so critical of us and rejecting a civil society initiative. And the meeting then basically concluded that we will try and find this balance between working together and holding accountable. And we would work together in principle, but that we would remain independent and critical of each other. And so we are going to watch the space to see whether or not this is a model that is going to be successful and one that we can continue to implement. And of course, this remains in the larger context of what the structure of the gender machinery should be in South Africa. And as Sheila pointed out in the beginning, whether or not these institutional structures and mainstreaming can ever really be truly successful without a strong women's movement to hold the state accountable. Thank you, Sheila.